Okay, TIFs. TIFs are a great mechanism in many different ways, and I support TIFs. And their original intent was when land is sitting there and it can't be developed because it's polluted or it has really a negative value. Nobody wants to touch it. There's no value there. So how do you get that back in the tax rolls? I mean, nobody's going to take on a property that has no value. So that's really how TIF came about. What are we going to do in this situation? So a developer would come and say, hey, I got to clean up this property. That's really how they started with properties that were polluted. And I can't afford to clean up this property and then expect to be able to do something and have the numbers make sense. So we need a process here to help me out to make this happen. And so what TIF is all about is, let's say that let's use that example of a polluted property. It takes $2 million to clean it up. So Mr. Developer goes to the city and says, or municipality and says, geez, just to get this thing to be at even, I got to spend $2 million, and it doesn't make sense. So you want it back in the tax roll. If you don't do this, nothing's going to happen. It'll keep sitting here. So how about we work together on this, and you lend me $2 million to do this work, and then, in essence, and then the tax revenue that this property generates for, be it 20, 25, 27 years, there's various length terms for different types of real estate, the tax revenue will pay off that bonding that was used to get that property back to zero so somebody can develop it. And, which really made a lot of sense to do in those types of situations. And I support those situations. And in fact, I even support situations beyond that. I think another time when TIF is very justifiable is when you're dealing with job creation, when you've got an industrial property, because a business can locate, in this town or that town or that town, and it's a competition then, and it's can be frustrating, but that's the leverage they have, and they look for a sweet deal from a municipality to see if they can create jobs because they're mobile. They can move around a little bit, okay? Even though real estate is real estate and every location is unique. And when you're creating jobs, that's a good thing. And even more so, I believe, when a municipality is involved in that business park, it makes sense. Now, when it probably slides down the ladder a little bit more is when you have a private developer doing it, because then you've got a private developer who's benefiting from a taxpayer subsidy, and you really need to think hard about that. But at least if it's creating jobs, that's something that's a good thing. And of course, ultimately, when a TIF gets paid off, those properties go on the tax roll, and that's good too. But I think municipalities have to really think long and hard about how they do those, and I would defend those in most cases when there's job creation involved. But what you're seeing more and more now is you're seeing TIFs just evolve way beyond what their original intent was. I mean, you look at Shorewood, Wisconsin, a Tony community of Shorewood, and this happened there, 10, 15 years ago, where there would be taxpayer subsidies on a Walgreens on the first floor, a AAA tenant, and luxury apartments above it. I mean, is that really something that you need to subsidize as a taxpayer? And the irony of it is that the developer paid millions for that property, but kind of knowing that a TIF would be there and would bail them out. So what happens when TIFs just become so prevalent, they really become like a drug for developers, and you just see it so many times. A developer's not going to do anything unless they get a TIF, and then they'll say, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to the next community. And like I said, in a business park, yeah, there might be some merit to that they have some flexibility where they might go. But as far as residential real estate, if you want to have your apartment complex in West Bend, that's different than Jackson, that's different than Kewaskum. They want to be in West Bend. And what happens with the TIF subsidy is, and where it distorts the marketplace, is these land sellers, they're aware that, hey, a TIF's there. Well, you know what? I mean, geez, instead of getting $500,000 for this property, I'm going to ask $1.5 million for it. And the developer's going to come in and say, geez, I'm paying $1.5 million. This building's going to cost me $7 million to build. Look at the numbers. It doesn't work. Well, would that project work not at $1.5 million, but at $500,000? If you shaved $1 million off that budget, would that project work? This is hypothetical, but in many instances, yeah, it would work. So really, what's the benefit to that TIF when all you're doing is lining the pockets of the property owner, and you're really kind of distorting the free market is what you're doing there. So that's why you really got to think about those situations when the original intent of TIFs was, no value, negative value. But then how do you really reconcile the fact that the taxpayers are going to subsidize this development, but yet the landowner is able to sell this property for potentially millions of dollars? Well, that's not a feasible development when he's paying that, and here's what the building costs, and the numbers don't work, and the only way it works is with a taxpayer subsidy. Well, then that land isn't worth that much, or maybe that project has to be a little different. But what I see more and more, and being in the business and knowing these people and talking to them, it's like, hey, I've talked to landowners who have said, okay, I'm doing a contract with this person, with this developer, and my contract says that if I'm selling it to them for $500,000, but if that developer gets a TIF, and this is right in some sales contracts, if that developer gets a TIF, I'm going to get $1 million for it. Same property, but depending upon whether there's a TIF or not a TIF, that landowner is savvy enough to say, well, I'll take this if you go for a TIF. If you get it, great. If you don't, I'm selling it for this. If you do, I'm selling it for that. Where's the benefit to the taxpayer in that situation? So that's really what you see a lot of. And the blighted is of course, it has to be determined to be blighted. Well, we all know that blighted is really what you call blighted. There's no definition of blighted. Anything can be blighted. If you say it's blighted, it's blighted. And that was, again, there was a court case on that, but the special interests piled a lot of money on law firms and attorneys to win that one, and they did win that one. And so you can call anything blighted, basically, is the way it is right now. Now, one thing that it also happens that you have to think about too when you do these TIFs is, so let's say you do a TIF that's going to have $20 million in increment in it, okay? And so what happens is, in 99.9% of the time, our levies can only increase with new construction, right? So you get a new construction in that TIF of $20 million, but yet that TIF isn't paying that levy. The taxes, real estate taxes that property, that TIF is paying is going to pay down that bond debt that might be there for 20, 25, 27 years. But the levy is going up. And I think what I know taxpayers don't understand necessarily is that, okay, that levy just went up $20 million. Well, and that $20 million that's in the TIF isn't paying it. So therefore, everybody else not in the TIF is paying for that additional levy. Because the levy is going up, taxes are going up because of that levy, but yet that increment really isn't going to the tax base yet, and it won't for 20, 25, or 27 years. So we have to be aware that it does cost all the other property owners money to subsidize that private developer's development. And I think that's really where we really need to think hard about the other things I just mentioned about how it drives up costs, it distorts the value, and if you never got into TIF, potentially, your land values or what these developers, what the landowners could get from these developers may not be as much. But that's why I say it's kind of like a drug, because once you start doing it, then everybody wants it, and then they all get it, and then the landowners know it, and your costs just exponentially increase. And how is it covered? By that subsidy from the taxpayer. And also, we all certainly know that those properties in those TIFs, that tax money, that real estate tax money is going to pay off that TIF. They're also, you can debate this, but they do generate the need for services, police, fire, and so on and so on. They're not paying for any of that because every penny of those tax dollars that normally goes to the schools, the county, the tech schools, all those other taxing jurisdictions, they're not getting them. they're going to pay off that bond that paid for the subsidy to make that development, quote, occur. And what I see, knowing the business is, the Ehlers of the world, they're very good, okay? And the developers, I've never seen Ehlers turn down a deal yet, to tell you the truth. They always end up making it work somehow, and it's always with a taxpayer subsidy. I've never seen or heard them say, you know what, I don't think you need to do this subsidy here. I think you can probably just have this developer and do this development, or if this one doesn't want to do it, the next one will. But it's going to happen anyways. But, Ehlers, their incentive is to, continue with all the fees, go through the entire process, and then every year, they're involved with analysis and auditing in many communities of these things. And so it's an income stream for them too. So, they kind of have a vested interest in seeing that these things happen also. And one thing that, is really irritating, I can look at MEC 1. Nobody's here from MEC 1, but MEC 1 has done a bunch of TIFs, okay? And you just see this with these developers.
I'm a taxpayer, love it. Work for Jackson, taxpayer from MEC 1.
Okay, well,
but I'm ready.
You can see it. So that developer, Schaefer Development, went in there, got a TIF, and the community is on the hook for 20, 25 years worth of debt. I'm not exactly sure what it is. She builds that thing up. It's stabilized, generating income, sells it, walks away with a boatload of cash, and MEC 1 is stuck with 20 years worth of debt. Now, you can't know that's going to happen ahead of time, but if you start to see it more and more, you wonder, okay, what are we really doing here? So again, that developer, and God bless capitalism and free markets, but this isn't a free market. And I am a real estate developer, okay? So I do this, I see this, but I don't believe in TIFs because I think it's fleecing the taxpayer in most instances. Not all, but in most. Especially in a situation like that where you see someone twice now do a TIF deal, walk off with a boatload of money, and leave the municipality with 20 years worth of debt. Did you really have to do that, if that's the case? So, and it's gray, it's not always black and white, but when you get to the extremes, it is black and it is white. And I think more and more we're getting those extremes where it is black and white and it's not gray. And of course there's the pay-go method, which is better because the municipalities aren't at risk at that point in time because they actually, the developer fronts the money. But in essence, you still really have that same impact because again, it's not all happening up front and it's not on the onus of the municipality, it's on the onus of the developer at that point in time in fronting the money. But still, the same thing is happening. Those tax dollars aren't going to defray the levy for everyone else. Those tax dollars are going to pay down the bond or to reimburse the developer if it's a pay-go. And the long and short of it is, again, the increment goes up, they don't really contribute to the levy, and everybody else pays more because that levy goes up in that community and the TIF's not really contributing to that. So it's just something that I think we need to think more about when we do these things. And the thing is there are some communities that maybe it's the only way they can get development. And I get that, okay? I understand that. And then let the taxpayers make that decision. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of transparency in this process to actually show what the taxpayers are paying out of their own pockets to subsidize these types of things. I think that might be a good thing to get more transparency. Something I've been working on a little bit, and I think I might have some success there. But these are really some of the topics I think that you need to think more about TIFs when you do them. And that's why we can't say, well, no TIFs and do this, because there are municipalities that should and maybe need to do TIFs, but there are other ones that really don't. But it's that shiny object and the new big building they can get, and everyone likes to see progress. But sometimes if you don't bite at that first apple, you can bite at the second one, and instead of having to wait 25 years to get a dime of taxpayer money or of real estate property tax and get that thing on the tax rolls, you can get that on maybe in a couple of years. And I think we just see that happening all too often, and it just frustrates the heck out of me when I know this business and I see developers coming in and getting these taxpayer subsidies that aren't necessary. and it's frustrating. So I've been able to pass some reforms to in the world of TID, a stress test that says, hey, let's see if this property, if the income stream that's being projected, if that decreases by 10%, will it still cover the debt? Okay, if it does, that's a good thing. Or oftentimes these TIFs get in trouble when they start spending more money after the half-life of the bond. That's when they get in, and so okay, you can spend money up until the half-life, don't spend any money after that. Or if it's a pay-go TIF, at least it protects the municipality, because I chair this committee where I see a lot of failed TIFs coming to the city, coming to the state, and they ask for special dispensation. So it's like, oh my God, how could you ever have done this? These numbers were never going to work, And then they want more time, or they think, well, if we only spend a little more money, we can make this TIF work, So those things happen too. Or sometimes there's a 12% cap on assessed value throughout a municipality, and some municipalities want to go beyond that. Well, to tell you the truth, some municipalities might have a good track record, and they actually could go beyond that. But some of them don't have a good track record, and there's no way they should go beyond that. So I think there's some ways where possibly that cap could be lifted some for the good actors, but not the bad actors too. So, that's just kind of a general rambling on TIF, and at least sharing some of my thoughts as to, the pros and cons of it. So if you guys have any questions or thoughts, please throw them out.
I have a thought on possible legislation that a TIF payment has to be guaranteed. Jay's familiar with the TIF on the Wisconsin, or the Milwaukee River. When the West Bank Company was converted to apartments, we had a developer that he would guarantee the TIF, and if he didn't make the increments, he would pay. But then we looked at his options, were could he pay back $6 million?
Right.
And it wasn't there. He was a good developer, but where would he come up with the money?
Right.
So we went to Hendricks and Beloit, sold the project to him, and he's worth billions, So $6 million was, this is a good investment. If I lose it, I lose it. And they just didn't make an increment a couple of years ago, last year. And the Hendricks family, built additional apartments to bring up the tax revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So if a TIF is guaranteed, it's the matter of proving that the developer has the resources to pay it. But at least it would make a municipality research to make sure that if the increment doesn't come in, that there's some way to get the money from the developer to pay back the community.
Right. I've advocated for clawbacks on TIFs, and believe me, the special interests hate that. They do not want to be on the hook for a clawback. Okay, so that's not there. Now that's good, having a clawback, but still, a TIF can work. The numbers can work. The real estate taxes generated can pay out the bond. You still have that situation of, was it necessary? Did it inflate the value of the property? It's being subsidized by the other taxpayers? And are those, without those other taxing jurisdictions getting money, is development within that TIF kind of freeloading on those places? And those things are all true. It's just horrible, of course, when the increment doesn't generate, and oftentimes I see those in Madison where the increment didn't generate, and that's when they come in and they say, we need more time. Or they're going to dig themselves a bigger hole. Well, we need a bigger TIF because this one didn't work. It needs to be bigger. So there's all sorts of things I see them coming in with that, to try to rationalize or to try to make it work again. And I try to work with them in the best way possible, keeping in mind the taxpayer to work them out of these problems and these problem TIFs. So yeah, problem TIFs are horrible. And I've got some stats here. A lot of them, there's donor TIFs and things like that, where actually this TIF should have been closed. It should have been going to benefit the taxpayer, but it's not, because the proceeds from that TIF, that positive TIF, are helping to subsidize that negative TIF. And so where do we get ourselves in by doing that? And I see, of course, a number of municipalities doing that. But of course, with the levy being controlled by new construction, that's an issue. And I agree with levy limits because, hey, we're about 35 amongst our 25 states, and in terms of a tax environment, I think we can be better. But what we're seeing is, last time I looked at the numbers, the total growth in equalized value in I think this was 20, basically put this way, the growth in TIFs is twice as fast as the growth in areas outside of TIFs. So the more and more development that happens in TIFs, the less and less that we really have actually contributing to the levy. And with the TIFs, development is being incentivized to go into TIFs. So when you want to raise your levy and you want to be able to support the services that are necessary in your communities, unfortunately, more and more of these developments are going into TIFs. Levies are flat, but yet those certain service needs are increasing, and you're kind of, it's a double whammy. So, just things you have to consider.
Sid, when I was in government, I never considered it a taxpayer subsidy because we had approved that without establishing the TID, the development wouldn't take place, so the development would never happen.
Right.
So it wasn't subsidized, it wasn't there. The
Right.
taxpayers would never get anything, at least.
Right.
So I'm not
That is,
sure if that law's still
that
in
is,
effect.
yes, that's the but for, the but
Right.
for, okay?
But we had
And that is about as concrete as blight.
Yeah.
I mean,
That is-
but for, this development, it ain't gonna happen. Well, but for overpaying for the land, but for a developer's fee, but for a general contractor's fee, but for paying the investors, all these things, the numbers don't work. I mean, there's different types of development models out there that are more cost effective. But when you have people, and a lot of these people doing TIFs, they come to deal with no money in their pocket, okay? Because they bring in their investor, they take their TIF subsidy to the bank, that's part of their down payment, and they have a general contractor who's gonna charge them a 6%. They've got a developer fee that they're charging their investors and so on. So there's a lot of fees, soft costs that are added on to these things that just go into various people's pockets. And so many of those things, when you add them all up, it's about the cost of a TIF that the taxpayers are subsidizing. So, I mean, these are just things that we need to be aware of when we do these things,
Another piece of legislation that seems like would make sense is not allowing the landowners to boost the price like that. I mean, the fact that they're literally putting it into the developer's agreement or the land sale
I mean,
contract is
it's a,
disgusting. There's no way to write that in the law.
they can sell their land however, for whatever they want, But when we facilitate that, they do it. If you don't facilitate it, you might be surprised how much more affordable, some of these developments could actually be. Because, like I said, I'm a developer and I believe in making a buck, okay? But like I said, I know these people, and it's kind of funny. It's, these are really rich people that are benefiting from these public subsidies. I'm not saying this isn't the first thing in government where that's ever happened, okay? But this is one where I think we can get a little more of a handle on and control. So
how do you control overpaying for land? Let's say you have an environmental issue on a piece of property, and the property owner is saying, well, if I didn't have environmental, it would be worth X amount, but I got some environmental, you know what, I'll take $1 million or $2 million off, but you're still paying. So how do you get a proper value on that?
The market determines that. You've got to have a willing seller and a willing buyer. And as far as pollution, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, there's responsible parties, and that's where you need to look for on pollution to get the responsible parties. And ironically, many times, one of the responsibilities might actually be that landowner. So that landowner is selling his property, walking away with a big check, and God bless him, he can, but then there's pollution that landowner is a responsible party on, and he's walking away from that with money. That just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I'm not sure if we're being good stewards of the taxpayer when that happens, So.
I've got a twofold problem. Okay, you're talking to the wrong West End, Hartford, Slinger. Our mill rate went down to $13.99 a thousand, which is very good. our village mill rate is under $5. So now we don't qualify for expenditure restraints, you know. So that's one, you know, so we don't get that revenue, which was nominal anyhow. But that also hurts our TIF. We lower our taxes, you know, because we have a lot of growth. We lower our taxes, our TIF revenues go down. Now our payrolls are, you know, hey, how come my check went down? You know, because your mill rate went down.
I mean, that's, if you didn't have a TIF, you wouldn't have that issue. But,
Yeah, but we go without the TIF, and fortunately, you know, with the TIF, you know, that's, like you said, you know, that's where a lot of our building is.
yeah,
And that allows us to keep the mill rate up somewhat.
yeah. I know, but that, again, that increment in that TIF, it's not really on the tax rolls. It's paying off that debt.
No, but we
Everybody
also
else is
get
paying it.
penalized because we don't get expenditure restraint, you know, which isn't right either. Maybe you should change that law.
Well, I'd like to check into the dynamics of that. I think I know, but I don't want to speak out of school, but I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And then, another project, I was just in Madison today, in the Madison suburb, and I was with a developer, and, he had a plan to build a commercial complex, and the city came up, and it was in the TIF, and they added $2 million worth of aesthetics to his property. And he says, it's not feasible. I built the same project in, you know, Port Atkinson, and now you want me to add $2 million to it, and the revenue's in there. You know, will you give me a TIF subsidy? And the city said, well, you know, bagel, you know. But I mean, you know, cities add a lot of cost to projects.
Oh, yeah, no question about it, but, you know, what's then, really, in theory, a property should, you know, be worth this amount of money, and that might be this much building and this much land. Well, you know, if there's more piled onto it, the land is worth less, you know, to be viable. And every time, you know, a city does that, it's really, you know, reducing the value of the land. I mean, you have to find a happy medium. I mean, you want to build good stuff in a community and things you can be proud of and so on. But that can be done. There's a happy medium there, you know, to do that. I mean, if the city's going to load up a whole bunch of unnecessary stuff, you know, I guess then, you know, that might depress the value of the land and to the point where it's not worth anything because it's not feasible. But, you know, is that really the right way for the free market to operate? I don't think so.
Yeah, I always mentioned to our architectural control board that nobody really goes to an industrial park to take in the landscaping.
Right.
And you just have to be sensible when you're thinking about stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you know, when you, in a business park, you use a TIF and you keep that land price down, you're gonna have a higher propensity of landing those tenants who are gonna create jobs and ultimately create tax base, you know. That's, and when the municipality can do a TIF and benefit from it, I mean, I'm good. I think that makes sense for our taxpayers when that happens.
Well, we have a problem in Fredonia. We had a developer that went bankrupt a number of years ago, and the remainder of the development has been laying there. And we had one developer come in and looked at it and watched, and another one came in. The third one came in, and he wants to do something about it, and he's incrementally nibbling into the problem and keeping afloat by selling a house here and there. But the actual problem is that the first developer that went bankrupt established 3 huge mountains of soil on the property, and the developer figures that it would probably cost him between $400,000 and $600,000 to move that.
Mm-hmm.
It was originally designed to get moved up to the northeast corner where it dips down, where they could fill it up and whatever. But nobody is coming with any kind of money in their pockets that they can do that within the cost of building out the subdivision.
What you should look at is, on any of those things, you should have a developer's agreement and you should have a letter of credit that you're provided, that when situations like that happen, you can be covered, you know, with a letter of credit from a developer, from a bank. I mean, that I think is something
Yeah,
that.
the problem with letter of credit, though, we got, you know, time limits on it.
Pardon?
A lot of the letter of credits have time limits on them.
Not always, not all of them.
Well,
A lot of them.
I mean, it's an obligation of that developer to maintain that letter of credit, and as improvements are made, the letter of credit works down, but, I mean, that's how you really protect your taxpayers, and you make sure that what someone says they're gonna do, they end up doing, because there's money hanging out there.
Well, how would you word something like that in a developer's agreement? You know, like, if developer A creates a problem that, creates a bill or something like this, that you'd be able to claw money back from the developer or something?
Yep.
You know, would that be possible?
Yeah, I mean, with a letter of credit, yes, it is possible, and you look at what's the total cost of the public infrastructure that's going to be going in here, you need a letter of credit to cover that. Now, you know, letters of credit, they don't cost a lot of cash out of your pocket, but, you know, you gotta have some collateral to as the developer to ensure that, but as he takes the money invested in the land in terms of sewer or infrastructure and so on, as that money goes there, you know, as the value of that land goes up, the value of the letter of credit goes down, and when it's done, the letter of credit's gone. When you start, it's all letter of credit, and then it goes down. I mean, that's how you protect your taxpayers, that's what makes sense.
The letter has to have a list of things, creating the total, right?
Yeah, I mean,
How can
you'll,
you put in that list, well, if you put 3 giant piles of soil here, you're gonna have to pay for moving it, or whatever.
well, you're gonna have a letter of credit that's gonna be outstanding, and that if they still have piles of dirt, I imagine they haven't even installed one lick of sewer or water in that site, and so.
Okay. All right, it would be a delicate situation. It'd be hard to get a developer to agree to something like
It
that.
happens all the time.
But if they wanna make the money, they're going to agree to it.
Letters of credit are out there all the time for developments.
Mhm.
It's the way you protect your taxpayers and your municipality.
That wouldn't be something for a TIF in a residential district, is what it's gonna be. To do just the soil moving, and then do a pay-go on each unit that's built or whatever, to pay back that entire increment of having moved the soil for them.
I mean, you could structure it however you wanted. You could certainly protect yourself in that regard.
The TIF would be hard because it'd be a residential TIF.
Well,
Yeah.
right, there's limitations on residential TIFs and so on, but.
Unless you could, like.
I suppose a developer should have enough backing or enough money himself to be able to do that and earn it back himself. I mean, that's kind of what it's.
Yeah, I mean, it's a risk, you know, development, that's the thing right now. You got so many people out there calling themselves developers. They don't have any money, but they're using a taxpayer subsidy to do it.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what's, you know, how the world has changed, so.
In other words, municipalities are too eager to get increment built.
I think.
And they're not thinking.
I think oftentimes that can be the case, yes. Not always, but oftentimes that can be the case. Or if they just showed a little patience or a little intestinal fortitude, they'd get the same thing done. It'd be on the tax rolls pretty darn quick instead of, you know, 20 years from now.
Mhm.
Senator Stroebel, these guys are hinting around the edges of residential TIDs, and I know where you would stand on that, but do you think they're coming, we're hearing from the developers, from the residential, single-family lot developers, that there are fewer and fewer of them, right? There are only the big boys left, so to speak, and even the big boys now are starting to clamor that unless the city builds their own roads or goes back to putting in the infrastructure on our dime, that they're not coming. So do you think there would ever be an appetite within the legislature to create residential TID, like solely
Yeah.
residential TIDs?
I would hope not, because if you ask those developers what they're paying for that land, they're paying a lot of money for that land. They're overpaying for that land. That's why those developments aren't feasible. They're overpaying for that land. Now, the interesting thing when you think about a residential development, and I've done research on this, and it's not rocket science. I mean, generally, let's say the existing homes in the community average $250,000. Well, it's uncanny, but it's generally, if a rule of thumb is if existing homes average $250,000, a new home in that community is going to be $500,000. Okay, so if you create a residential TIF, what you're doing is you're subsidizing $500,000 homes on the backs of $250,000 homes. That makes sense, you know?
Yeah, I'm not advocating. for it.
Yeah, I
I'm
know,
just
I know,
curious
but-
If you
but-
think there is going to be, so those same developers are telling us that if we had free land in West Bend, we could not develop new single-family residential stuff. And I know some of that's smoke, I did just
That's-
fall off the turnip truck yesterday, I
Yep.
get that. But they're saying it, and they're saying it
Yeah.
louder and more,
Yeah,
and there is a residential void in a lot of areas, not just in West Bend, but in Washington County. We have fewer and fewer lots available for any kind of home.
Can
Right,
you send them
right.
here, Jay?
Pardon?
Send the residential development
Oh,
to Jay.
fine.
Well, no, but I
Yeah,
mean.
no,
yeah,
I
It's
mean-
a serious question, so
Right.
they're starting to clamor for residential TIDS.
Yeah, well, again, how much are they paying for that land? And I see the price of this land around here, it's expensive.
Yeah.
You know, and those landowners are walking away with some pretty damn big checks.
Yeah.
Maybe they shouldn't be walking away with those checks that big. That's where the market has to work. Let the free market work and don't distort it with subsidies. Because that situation there, if it's expensive, guess what's gonna happen with the next subdivision after that first one gets a TIF? That next one is gonna be even worse. Because that landowner will say, hey, I'm getting a TIF now. I'm gonna price that at more. And it's just a spiral that just gets out of control. The more you have
But
these
how-
government
how do you
subsidies.
build, a working, husband and wife both work, one makes $25 an hour, the other one makes $20 an hour. And like you said, the houses, like in Slinger, we had a developer, oh, we're building working class housing. I says, what does the price take? $400,000 to $500,000.
Yeah,
I mean,
Some of them were 800,000.
yeah,
right,
$800,000.
right. Well, those aren't working class houses
No,
and,
No,
They
but that's what
say
they
they
would
are.
classify
Well,
them. And,
yeah, they're
but,
pulling their leg. And because, I mean, not everybody, the first home they ever buy is a new home. You know, it's that existing home, and then those people move up to the new homes. I mean, that's
Trouble
kind
is
of the way it's
though,
worked.
the way our society or whatever is, everybody wants new. They
Yeah,
don't want
but-
the used
but-
home, they want the
Right,
new
right.
home. And you have a problem having young families move into your community because they can't afford the homes.
Yes. Well, then, I mean, it's a free market, then maybe your community is too expensive for them. Maybe that's just the way it is. Or maybe if no development occurs, those landowners will become a little more reasonable, the price will go down, and those lots will be less, you know? I mean, but all I can say is, the more you subsidize something, the more expensive it gets. That's just a fact. So you wanna be good, I know we all wanna help people and all that, but when you subsidize them, you might be helping that group, but the next group is gonna pay more, and the next group will pay more, because that subsidy just puts you in a vicious circle going in the wrong
well,
direction.
the state's pushing it though.
Yeah.
What?
And, you can extend a TIF by 1 year if you, put money towards, low and moderate income
Yeah.
housing.
Right,
And, so you guys are pushing it, but yet again, you're saying, well, we can't, you shouldn't do it,
There's
well,
gotta
I
be a
mean, you
way
can,
that
you can
it's-
do it if you want, I mean, that's the statute, it's the law, you can extend it for a year and keep that money and use it for what you want, so, yeah. But again, you guys need to look out for your individual taxpayers,
Yeah.
you know, that's what it's all about.
It's just you wanna help these young families.
I know, but you're helping, and you can make that policy decision. Yes, we're going to help these young families, and everybody else is gonna pay to help those young families. And there might be young families that are in that existing home that someday would like to buy a new home. But guess what? Now they're paying to help somebody else buy that new home. That might be of the same economic status as them. And they're working hard to do that, but yet they're subsidizing somebody else to get in. Basically, like I said, that $250,000 house is subsidizing a $500,000 house, new construction. Just how it is, so you just need to keep that in mind.
Are some of the problems, the attractiveness of TIPs and TIDS, is that because cities and villages only have property tax as a tax base? In other words, we don't get the benefit of sales tax.
Right.
We don't have another revenue stream to go. I ran for reelection, and one of the people working against me was the county executive, who talked about how he was able to balance his budget without raising property tax. He never mentioned the fact that as the county executive, he has access to sales tax.
Yeah.
And yet, that sales tax is mostly generated in cities and villages, who have to pay for services to support the people that are generating that tax.
Yeah, well, we all pay sales tax, but,
I
right,
realize we all pay it. We
Yep.
mostly
You don't know the benefit of it.
do that in cities and villages. We don't do it, out in, the hinterlands of cornfields.
well, the people who live out there pay them, one way or another, but, I mean, I get what you're saying, they have another income stream to support their government, county government,
Right.
Yeah.
And so we don't really have that, in municipalities.
right, that's,
We just
That's not
goes
how-
one way.
yeah, that's not how Wisconsin is set up. You have but, there's a benefit to property tax too. I mean, it's just the way our government works here in this state.
But that sales tax was a new thing, it wasn't always there for counties, that came out, 10 years, 15 years ago, maybe 20?
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
supposed to
So,
be temporary.
somebody thought it was good for the counties.
right.
Maybe
Right.
those same people, as Ellen is saying, should think about maybe giving municipalities, cities and villages
Yeah.
a 2%,
Well,
whatever. or
yeah, I mean,
0.2%.
again,
I remember the discussions,
Yeah.
and the counties were the good stewards, and they would make sure that largesse
Yeah.
was properly distributed, and
Yeah.
it's
Well,
not.
I mean, I'm not gonna defend counties, but they do provide a lot of different services that, cities don't. But I guess it all comes down to, where is Wisconsin in terms of its tax environment? About 10 years ago, before, Walker got there, we were, according to the Tax Foundation, we were number 46 out of 50 states. Not good. Now I think we're at about 35. A lot better. Came down 11. But, there's still 34 other states that have a better tax environment than us. Now, it's always a balance between services and taxes and so on. But I gotta admit that the lower tax states, you generally see more economic development. And when you see more economic development, generally you see the city coffers, doing pretty well. So, that's kind of the conundrum that you always have with the tax environment and government. If you have low taxes, maybe you get more economic development in the way you actually benefit more, generate more money for the public coffers. But, there's a balance there. And I believe at 35, I think where we are right now, I think that we still need to strive to do better and to be more efficient with our government, because I think that we'll see the benefits of more economic development, and it'll spiral in a good way, not a bad way. Because I think since we were 46 and now we're at 35, I think we've seen a lot of good economic benefits happen in the state of Wisconsin. And I think if we move that needle a little bit more, we'll see even more. So.
But it's bothered me ever since the state government got involved with municipal taxes. I was a mayor of West Bend for 18 years, and I can talk in 18 budgets, the number of public people that attended a budget hearing in 18 years. We increased taxes slightly because we needed to. We needed to pay our firefighters, pay our policemen. But then the state came in and said, you can't do that anymore.
Right.
So then things start going to hell in the municipalities. City streets don't get fixed. Everything gets run down. Pretty soon, somebody's gonna have to come up with a way to pay for all of these deferred expenses that municipalities haven't been doing, because they just don't have the revenue to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the federal government doesn't come to you guys in Madison and tell you how you can spend your money, what you can raise your taxes on, do anything like that, because there's, and I'm sorry I'm gonna say
the
this.
federal government prints money,
Right,
and we
but
don't.
they don't control what you spend.
Well, actually, because we send a lot of money to the federal government, it comes back to us with strings attached.
Yeah, 10 cents on
And
the
you
dollar.
can, or, first off, there's, you send them $1, what do you get back? Maybe 60 cents, and that 60 cents comes with strings attached. So
Same with
that's a
us.
whole nother story.
We
but-
send a lot of money to the state as municipalities, and you keep cutting what
Yeah.
we're getting back.
Well, I'd rather see you send less money to the state. I think we'd all be better off,
Yeah.
because the people in Madison aren't any smarter than any place else, I'd rather you guys keep your money, and we do less of what the federal government does on just a different scale. And again, when you look at the overall tax environment in the state of Wisconsin, we're still about 35. So I think we can do better, you know.
But taxes and fees, you know, you gotta combine the two,
Th-
because
that-
that's what
right,
others.
but that is an overall government expenditure. That's fees, taxes, the whole deal, you know. That's
See, in the
really
past,
what,
we didn't do that, we just said basically tax. We never compared the fees in other communities.
yeah, yeah.
So we weren't as bad as was portrayed, because other communities, say Chicago, they have a fee for a car, their
Yeah,
license.
and it's never enough.
$800
It's never
or
enough, is it?
$500.
Yeah,
But we had $35 a year. Then they had a fee to park in Illinois, you had a fee to park in this county, you had a fee
Yep.
to park in this city.
yep.
All those fees weren't included in that comparison.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
so it wasn't a true compar, we were never as bad off as was portrayed because we didn't include fees.
yeah, well, we were 46 of an overall environment. I think New York, Illinois, and I don't know who else is worse than us.
Taxes.
But,
Not taxes and fees. We looked at that number so many times when I was mayor, and we could never get our legislators to prove that fees and taxes were included. It was just plain property taxes, income tax,
that's,
but nothing with fees.
yeah,
And
I'm
so
not,
I
I'm not,
think that number
I'm not
was
sure about that.
wrong. Because our taxes, if you include fees, we're right in there with,
Yeah, I believe it's a cumulative approach that the tax foundation looks in terms of, it's about government spending is what it is. So, but we can debate that another day. So,
To continue learning from you, if you don't mind another question.
sure.
You had outlined some, next moves if dark store were to have those, and then to apply that concept to our conversation of TIF. What next moves, if any, do you foresee? Is there a change in the 12%? Is there a change in allowable uses? Obviously, your efforts
Yeah,
might not
yeah.
speak to the whole
Well-
initiative, but
well,
what do you foresee?
Speaking of special interests, the realtors write big checks to people in government. And the
Making a
realtors,
lot of money for
this is the golden goose for them. They fight it fiercely, TIF legislation. I know, because I take them on. I'm a realtor, okay? And, I'm a problem for them, okay? Because I think the ball would have been moved further, even on TIFs, if it hadn't been for me. And, I think that's good for the taxpayer. I think it's good for the health of the state of Wisconsin. And again, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, okay? But this is my business and I do understand it. And they would much rather prefer there be more public subsidy because they make more money. And because they know that's the case, they write checks to a lot of assemblymen and state senators, and they do what they want then because of that. And that's politics. It's a shame. There's too much money in government, believe me. I'm all for term limits because I think people won't throw as much money at people if that's the case. But that's a whole nother issue too. But so that there are special interests again that just defend this tooth and nail because they make money on these things. It's a public subsidy, and their people make money on it, and that's why they defend it so vigorously.
I think what Mike was talking about was incentivize villages and cities to just seek after new construction at whatever cost, because that was our only way of increasing the levy.
Right.
Insurance goes up, gas goes up,
Yep.
everything in
Yep.
the world goes up.
Absolutely.
And if you have no new houses and no new places, businesses built in your village,
Right.
you're gonna start cutting,
Right? No, you want to incentivize new development. Or you want to incentivize new development. But are you really helping yourselves when you subsidize it with a taxpayer subsidy? That you're really kind of digging yourself a bigger hole when you do that. When you're creating more increment in a TIF that really it raises the levy, but your taxpayers, everybody outside the TIF, they're gonna just keep paying more money. And the people in the TIF aren't gonna pay. Yeah, in 25 years, that'll come on the tax roll. Hooray, that's a good thing. But are you really helping yourself when you always got X billion dollars of TIF debt out there, and maybe one rolls off, great, but then you roll another one on. And yes, you want to grow your levy, because, and you're, with new construction, as you can with new construction, and then you can raise more money, and because your levy increases, but you're not doing it when you put that new construction in a TIF. It's not happening that way then. That's why I get a kick out of it. You know, you see these communities and, oh, we have $50 million worth of new development in our community. Isn't that great? Well, it's not helping you, you know. It's maybe in 25 years it will, but it ain't helping you now. It's just, and maybe it is the right decision, but I just think a lot of people just don't understand all the dynamics involved with the TIFs to really make sure they're making a good decision.
Seems like a lot of communities would start to sit kind of stagnant though. I mean, it seems like the TIF concept is what creates a lot of this development. And otherwise it would just stay, you know, and in some people's minds, perhaps they want their small community to stay small, you know what I mean? And if it gets any bigger, they're just gonna move somewhere else. Well, that's an opportunity you have. And if myself, living in a city that's bigger than 20,000, you know, bigger than 30,000 now, I sort of expect to chip in on the progress that the city might make. It's a city, that's how it is.
Well,
know?
you pay taxes for that, but you
But
don't give.
to presume that the taxpayers don't want to contribute to the progress of the city is maybe not accurate.
But I mean, is it beneficial to contribute to the progress of the city when you're subsidizing a private developer or inflating the cost of vacant land that really is only happening because of a subsidy? I mean,
I don't care who's doing it, as long as we just had the brewery project, for example, which I'm sure you probably wouldn't like very much because it was.
I don't know. I haven't seen the numbers. Maybe it makes sense.
I know the landowner
you know?
didn't inflate the price at all.
Yeah.
But I grew up right up the street from this area that became blighted, and of course that's a subjective term. That makes sense, but. Yeah, I'm happy to contribute to that developer making that intersection beautiful again.
Yeah.
Because it really gives it a piece of
Well,
crap.
and that's
So
fine.
It's a total value for me. you
Yeah.
know, And if I have to pay a few extra bucks, no big deal.
Yeah, well, that's you, I guess, and that's fine, you know, and some communities make that decision, but I think a lot of communities don't really realize that, and I'm not sure what a lot of the taxpayers in West Bend would think, that the moment that property's done, stabilized, rented, the developer sells it, walks away with a boatload of cash, and everybody else paid to make it happen. I mean, you gotta think about that too. So that's the other side of the coin, you know, so.
Senator, can I ask a follow-up question to that? Because you said that a few times now, and I wrote it down once when I thought I heard you say it a different way. When you say the other residents paid to make it happen,
Right.
you're not saying that they're paying extra tax dollars to
Yeah.
make it, unless it's an upside down tip. What I think you're saying is they're not receiving the immediate benefit from that new increment by having the ability to have their taxes lower.
No, they are paying extra money.
Yeah, they're paying
They are.
extra $7,500
Because
a
the
year.
increment that went up, that, let's say $40 million in a TIF, the increment went up, the levy went up 40 million. So who's paying that additional levy?
That is what you're saying.
Not the people in the TIF, yeah. Everybody else is paying that. So they are contributing to the subsidy of that private development. And if you think that's a good decision for your community, fine. But I don't think a lot of people really realize that's what they're doing. And do they even really need to do that oftentimes? Because again, the more you subsidize something, the more it costs. That's just how the world works. And you're distorting the free market when you do that. You just can't catch up. So.
Yeah, I believe there's probably 20% of people in West Bend that couldn't afford to pay an extra $50-75 on property taxes. I mean, they really couldn't afford it. There's all different strata of income in any village, city, and there's a bunch of people that, well, I wouldn't mind spending an extra $50. Yeah, I like it, you know, it's pretty and everything. And then there's the people that are living from hand to mouth, and they really can't afford to pay the tax bill they got, much less when that's $100 more.
And that's one issue.
And they're your citizens too.
Right. And do you have to do that? You know,
Yeah.
like I say, I see these developers, and I know that they don't need it, but they can get it, and they'll do it, you know? So that's the frustrating part.
Mm-hmm. That's because government's involved. If it came down to two people shaking their hand over the fence, it would be fair. we involve government and it just goes haywire.
So, and like I said, don't get me wrong, I understand there's a reason for TIFs, and I support them. I just believe that there's abuses that are going on that aren't beneficial to the state or its taxpayers. So, that's all.
You said like one place in Mequon, where they had the TIF and it was subsidized, but then the guy sold the place and the Mequon was left with it.
The debt attributable to the TIF.
How can that happen?
How can
Because
it
I
happen?
mean, usually, like if I buy a business, I assume the debt or they carry the
Right,
debt,
right.
you know?
Not in the case of a TIF. In the case of a TIF, the municipality went out and subsidized that development with cash,
Yeah,
and then, but the developer has their own loan for, additional funds. And when the developer sells it, sure, they pay off their own loan, but that developer's agreement and that TIF is still in place, there's still debt associated with that TIF,
yeah.
and the proceeds from that sale don't go to pay that TIF off.
So
It's the
he's
real
not
estate taxes
obligated.
over time. No. So
There's
that
no way you
property's
can-
sold and gone.
There's no way you can lock that up?
I mean, that would be a clawback, which, oh my God, they're on fire when you talk about clawbacks. And
Because it
Special
just seems
interest.
like a nice gimmick, you know?
it is a nice gimmick. That's why I'm here talking to you guys. So,
Okay, so I'm just gonna follow up on that. So we're talking about the Schaefer deal. It was Studio 47 or whatever it was, right?
yeah, two of them.
The public market deal.
Yeah, that
So-
one as well as where the Cafe Hollander was, to be specific. Yeah.
So they had the TID. She met the obligations of the developer's agreement. The TID was made whole, so they're receiving the increment. They're paying down the debt that they incurred within that TID. Even if they sell it, they still have the increment coming in to pay down the debt.
Right. But was that really necessary if a developer could, within 2 years of breaking ground and stabilization, sell it, walk away with a boatload of money? I don't exactly know what she sold for it, but the long and short of it is, I've heard generally that it was a lot of cash. And so therefore, that person walks away for taking a risk and making a bunch of money, but the city now is left with 20 years of bonding that they have to pay, that the real estate taxes from that property won't go to the general levy, won't go to the individual taxing jurisdictions. It will continue to go to amortize that bond that was utilized to subsidize that development. I guess that's the point I was trying to make. And you can decide whether that's good or bad.
So he profited from using government money.
Yeah, okay.
Something unique about the example, which actually applies to Jackson, not to go too far in the taxpayer realm, because my taxes did go down in that one.
They would have gone down more, but
I presume so. What are your thoughts on the case when the community or the municipality actually already owns the land in the TID? Therefore, we're kind of going back to when it's a
Yeah.
private developer
yeah, right.
versus.
I mean, I think there's much more rationalization for that because, you're not, for the public good then. It's not a private developer that, is having a subsidy, so. I'm sure you guys got a lot more to talk about tonight, so, if you ever want to talk to me more about TIF, I'll be happy to talk to you. Call me, I'm in the phone book. I have an office in Cedarburg and I got the one in Madison too, so anytime you ever have any questions or other thoughts, be happy to talk, but, you beat this one pretty good tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Sure,
you.
yeah.
Before you go, Senator Stroebel, I got